which we're actually reading in the triennial segment of this year as well. Vayaki Tavo el haaretz. When you enter the land that the Lord your God is giving you as a heritage. That's a fancy word for something you inherit. And you possess it and settle in it. You shall take some of every first fruit of the soil which you harvest from the land that the Lord your God is giving you, put it in a basket, and go to the place where the Lord your God will choose to establish his name. You shall go to the Kohen in charge at that time and say to him, I acknowledge this day before the Lord your God that I have entered the land that the Lord swore to our fathers to assign us. And then you shall recite as follows. This is not just something that you say, it's a formula. It's a text. You shall recite it before the Lord your God. Arami Oved Avi, my father was a fugitive Aramean. He went down to Egypt with meager numbers and sojourned there. All right. So here's the ritual that, every Israelite farmer was expected to participate in for certainly, the place where the Lord your God will choose to establish his name, that eventually is the temple. Right? So that's where you go and you bring your first fruits and you recite the prayer. This is one of the very few prayers actually listed in the Torah. I mean, yes, you have Shema and you have Az Yashir, but Harami Oved Avi, and you all know the passage, Harami Oved Avi, because it's in the Passover Haggadah. Right?
Actually, Rabbi, I have a question about that.
Yeah.
In the Haggadah, or at least all the Haggadot that I've read that I can remember, it's my father was a wandering Aramean, and this says fugitive. That's a completely different meaning.
So this is the New Jewish Version translation, the JPS translation. The word oved, I don't think wandering is as good a translation. Oved is related to the word avad, which means lost. So is it someone who has lost his land or lost his status? Right? He lost his status as a landholder when he went down to Egypt.
A fugitive, though, I'm sorry, I thought you were going.
So I think, although both of them convey similar ideas, I think this translation may be slightly more accurate.
A fugitive is someone who has committed a crime and avoided justice, though.
Not necessarily.
It's not?
No. A fugitive is someone who is running away from something. So he's fleeing from something. What did our ancestor who went down to Egypt flee from? Famine. So.
Okay, well, that's my ignorance of the English word, not the Hebrew word. So very good. Thank you.
Okay. So here we are. We say the formula, and this is a ritual mentioned in the Torah, observed in the time of the temple, apparently both the first temple and the second temple. Right? Now, we know for sure that it was observed in the period of the second temple. And why is that? Because the Mishnah contains a lengthy recollection of how the ritual was performed. Okay? And that is the subject of this next text.
I'll be back in 30 seconds. Excuse me.
Carry on. Okay? So here is what the Mishnah tells us about how this was observed, and it's very vivid, and there's tremendous pageantry in this this telling. Right? Now, the Mishnah usually it doesn't use more words than it has to. Mishnah is pretty terse most of the time, but they don't spare anything in telling you how extraordinary this ritual was. So it asks the question, how did they take up the first fruits to Jerusalem? In other words, how was this ritual observed? So there were groups of people who assisted with the temple service, and they were called ma'amadot. Okay? So, the ma'amadot were distributed all over the land of Israel. So if you it was kind of like a district capital where all the people of the ma'amad would gather together, and they would go to the temple to do their service for the 2 weeks or whatever it was. All right? So wherever the ma'amadot gathered, that's where the men of all the towns in that district would get together. They would spend the night in the open place of the town, and they would come to the houses. And then early in the morning, the officer, presumably the leader of the pack, said, "Arise and let us go up to Zion unto the Lord our God." Now that's also a ritual formula because that's a verse from Scripture, right? But that, of course, is what they are doing. They're going up to Zion. Before them went the ox. Maybe they're bringing an ox to be sacrificed at the temple also, in addition to the first fruits. And its horns were overlaid with gold, and a wreath of olive leaves on its head. This poor ox with all this junk they pile on it. Probably didn't appreciate that, they were, doing honor through him. Okay? And the flute was played before them until they approached Jerusalem. That's a long time to have to listen to a flute. Right? It's, because, the Ma'amadot are all over the land. You could be traveling for, more than a day to get to Jerusalem. Right? When they approached Jerusalem, they sent messengers before them and adorned their first fruits. Now, God doesn't give you a lot of detail about that. Maybe they just, they gathered flowers together and put them in the baskets. We don't know. But somehow they adorned them. The officers and the prefects and the treasurers of the temple went forth to meet them. According to the honor due to those who came, would they go out? In other words, this group is, if you're bringing the first fruits, you have a certain degree of honor because it's an honor to be able to do that and to bring them to the temple. And so the temple officers, the machers, right, they come out to meet them. And if it's a more honored group, then either more of them would come out to greet them, or they would, they would come farther out to walk with them on the way to Jerusalem. And here's another neat thing: all the craftsmen in Jerusalem would rise up before them and greet them, saying, brothers, men of such and such a place, you are welcome. All right? People come to Jerusalem all the time. But if you're coming to bring your first fruits, that's special. And the craftsmen would get up and greet them. Most of the craftsmen, you're not going to interrupt your work for just anybody. But the people bringing their first fruits, they're special. Right? The flute was played before them until they reached the Temple Mount. So this flute is going on all the way from back in the town where they left until they get all the way to the temple. When they reached the Temple Mount, even Agrippa the king would take his basket on his shoulder and enter. In other words, this ritual was performed not just by ordinary shlubs, but by everyone. Everyone who had any agricultural produce whatsoever would bring their first fruits, even the king. Right? And the fact it mentions the name of the king. Now, I don't know exactly the years when Agrippa was king, but it tells you that somebody remembered it from that time. And when they reached the temple court, this is before the Holy of Holies, right? The Levites sang the song, I will exalt you, O Lord, for you have raised me up and have not suffered my enemies to rejoice over me. Now, if you come to the morning service, you know that psalm, Psalm 30. It is preceded by the words, Mizmor Shir Chanukat HaBayit LeDavid. Right? It's a song of something for the dedication ceremony of the temple. Right? But they would sing this song, I will exalt you, O Lord, you have raised me up and have not suffered my enemies to rejoice over me. In other words, this is a song of gratitude. All the bad things that could happen to destroy your crops back then, that didn't happen. All the things that might have made, some shlub want to gloat over your failure, they didn't happen. And so here they sing this song, really a very appropriate song of thanksgiving, but also if you know the psalm and if you don't know it, you should look it up because it's really one of the most special pieces in the Siddur. I haven't given a sermon on it recently. I probably should, but it also reminds you that you can go a long time without anything bad happening to you, and you think you're invincible, and then something bad happens, and you realize you're not. Right? Something happens, and you're all of a sudden you're vulnerable. And this psalm underscores the gratitude of somebody who faced that moment. And as he says, with God's help, I dealt with it. I overcame it. Right? So when you bring the first fruits, you bring them with the knowledge that every farmer has, which is how much can go wrong. And thank God it didn't, because here I'm bringing the fruit. Okay? And then while the basket was yet on his shoulder, a man would recite the passage, Arami Oved Avi. Okay? So, it's just exactly as it's described in the Torah. He brings his basket, and this is what he says. Right? That, according to the Mishnah, is the way the ritual was performed. How accurate is the Mishnah? Probably pretty accurate. Probably this was someone's oral recollection of having seen what was done with the first fruits, and who passed that message on to other rabbis after the temple was destroyed and the ritual was no longer observed. And then it was passed down orally until the Mishnah was written down in about the year 200. So that's, that is probably a pretty accurate declaration of what happened.
I looked up Agrippa's lifetime, and it was 63 through 12 BCE. So since this is quoted, this part about him, that they may have actually had firsthand observance of that. If it's in the Mishnah, that overlaps, right?
Yes. Well, let's put this. The Mishnah is only edited and written down about the year 200. But there are many, many teachings in the Mishnah that are orally conveyed from first century teachers, and some even earlier.
Well, it could easily be within a generation or two of someone who actually saw this happen.
Yes.
So that's interesting, I think, to me.
Yeah. So again, this is, this is a detailed and vivid picture of the pageantry of this ceremony, right? And apparently very widely observed. That is our guest today. Okay. Other comments or questions up to here? Okay.
Well, I'll go ahead and ask one.
Please.
A minor one, I guess. Why an ox? Why not a donkey or some other animal that's, an ox is kind of a big animal. It's hard to control. The only thing it's good for is plowing. It seems that's a strange animal that you would honor this way.
Yeah. Well, they didn't have horses. Okay. So if you needed an animal that was going to carry a lot of things, then an ox was a pretty good choice, I guess.
Okay.
Are you
Yes.
sure that the word flute, maybe it was some other instrument that sounded prettier? And the translation.
I think it's a flute. Can't swear to it. Their flute might be a little different from ours.
Okay.
In the movies, that always looks more like a recorder.
Right.
And we all know the movies are very accurate in those historical details.
Every movie, right. Yeah. Yes, Dell.
Yeah, like the Ten Commandments.
Dell, if you're going to say something, you should unmute yourself.
Just giving a thumbs up to Daniel's comment about the movies being accurate.
Right.
Like
Yeah.
the Ten Commandments.
Right. Yeah. Thoroughly accurate movie. But that's Hollywood for you. Okay. So there are a number of commentators who have talked about different reasons for or lessons that we derive from the bringing of the first fruits. I think, the initial reasons are fairly cut and dried. Not that they're not important, but they're fairly obvious. Why would we command the farmer to bring the first fruits?
In an agricultural society, they need to express their thanksgiving for what they've got.
Yes, right? So express thanksgiving, acknowledge it's not just me, acknowledge that, God gave us this land, etc. So attitude of gratitude and that's, and remembering where you came from. That's, that's pretty straightforward.
There might be a practical reason too. If it's the first fruit, I assume that means the first part of a harvest, and there's a whole bunch there. Where if you wait until later on, people start looking at, well, we're going to run out, and they're not going to bring as much, and they're going to whine, and up front they're all excited, they feel rich, and they're ready to give everything away.
Yeah. So, yeah, that's why that's a good reason why it's the first fruits.
The first fruits, right?
Yeah. So let me share with you first this comment. It's not a comment. It's like a chapter from Maimonides, from the Guide for the Perplexed, and why this happened to be in the Guide for the Perplexed, I don't know, because I didn't look up the entire context. But here's what he says about this ritual. He says, a similar purpose underlies the law concerning truma, the heave offering, the truma being that which is set aside for the coin, the dough offering, the first fruit, and the first shearing. Okay? For the first of everything is to be devoted to God. And by doing so, man accustoms himself to being generous and to limit his appetite for eating and his desire for property. So, Daniel, it's not just that, he might forget if he waited until later on. It is the first of everything belongs to God. And it also trains you to give away the first. Yes, Del.
The only thing you can actually guarantee you get is the first. Once you've gotten the first, you can't guarantee there will be a second.
Well, that's true. Of course, by the time they bring the first fruit, they probably have more than the first fruit. Right?
But actually, Dell's comment is pretty close to what I meant. You're going to ask them to give away something when you know they've got it and they're not running out or whatever.
Yeah. Okay, so Maimonides continues, the reciting of a portion of the Torah when the first fruits are brought to the temple, in other words, the Arami Oved Avi text, promotes humility as well. For he who brings the first fruits takes the basket upon his shoulders and proclaims the kindness and goodness of God. This ceremony teaches man that it is essential in the service of God to recall previous experiences of suffering and distress in days of comfort. The Torah lays stress on this duty in several places. Right? You shall remember that you have been a slave. Those who amass wealth and live in comfort are more prone to fall victim to the vices of insolence and haughtiness and abandon all good principles. And the Torah warns about this in a couple of verses, and among others, lest you eat and be full, and then your heart be lifted up, and you forget God. And then in Parshat Ha'azinu, this very poetic verse, which I think should have been put on the front door of our synagogue. And Yeshurun grew fat and kicked. There aren't that many references to Yeshurun in the Torah. And yes, comes from the word yashar, which is, someone who is upright, who is dependable, who is, a person of integrity. Yosher means integrity. Okay? But, when it talks about Yeshurun at the end of the Torah, it says Yeshurun grew fat and kicked. Okay? So, I think every child in our religious school at the synagogue ought to be taught that verse. And probably board members too.
I know what growing fat is, but what is kicking?
kicking is complaining, right? Or alternatively, it could mean that you're kicking something else. If you are more prosperous than everyone else, then you kind of kick them down the road, right? So Yeshurun grew fat and kicked. I should give a Rosh Hashanah sermon on that verse one year. I don't know. It won't be this year because this year's is already. It's pretty much written, but that's a good one for at some point. Also, this is part of Parshat Ha'azinu, which is normally read on the Shabbat between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Now, I never give a sermon on Shabbat Shuvah, on that Shabbat, but if I ever did, maybe this would be the verse I would quote.
Rabbi Malef quoted this long time ago. I've always been aware of it because he did that.
Who quoted it?
Rabbi Malef.
Yes.
Yes, he started in 1943 and went through 1960.
Yes. He was there for around 30 years or so. I will not go into my Rabbi Malef story during a class. Anyone who wants to hear it will have to remind me sometime after shul. But I've told the story many times, and I'll tell it again. On account of this fear, right, the fear that you would, just become too comfortable and be insolent, the Torah commanded us to bring each year a certain portion before the Lord and his glory, presumably meaning the temple, when we offer the first fruit. You know how much the Torah insists, and we should always remember the plagues that befell the Egyptians, that you may remember the day when you came forth out of the land of Egypt all the days of your life, that you may tell in the years of your child what things I have wrought in Egypt. Okay? So always remember what happened in Egypt. Such an observance was necessary in order to perpetuate the memory of the departure from Egypt, since such events authenticate prophecy and the doctrine of reward and punishment. Now that's Maimonides, the philosopher, there talking. But the memory of the departure from Egypt, why do Jews today remember the departure from Egypt so well? Because we have a Seder every year, right? If you come to synagogue every day, so yeah, you'll probably pick it up there too. But even Jews who never come to synagogue, if they go to a Passover Seder, they know that, our ancestors went out from Egypt. We were slaves in Egypt, right? So Maimonides doesn't go into detail with that, but he says such events, in other words, like the ritual with the first fruits, authenticate prophecy and the doctrine of reward and punishment. In other words, prophecy because, Moses said, let my people go, or this is going to happen to you, and it happened, right? Or reward and punishment. Look what happened to the Egyptians, right? And he says the benefit of any commandment that serves to keep certain miracles fresh in the memory or to perpetuate true faith is therefore obvious. Right? So here you have Maimonides, who's, real, one of his biggest contributions is as a philosopher, as the author of the Guide for the Perplexed, making the argument for certain rituals, certain actions that keep certain events fresh in the memory of the community. Thus saith Maimonides. Comments, questions? Yes, I'm looking at Barbara's note in the chat, right? That, rituals, become habit if they are regularly observed. And that's exactly what Maimonides is reminding us with the bringing of the first fruits.
The
Anyone else?
danger is that they become so habitual that you forget why you're doing them and what their meaning is.
Right. So some people do a Passover Seder because they love getting the family together. And the Seder itself becomes fairly perfunctory. Okay? You have to remember why you're doing it. You have to be doing it for the right reason. Okay? All right.
Whoever remembers elaborates on the outgoing from Egypt, that one merits praise.
Yes. All right.
That's from the Haggadah.
Yes. So now, I want to share with you a teaching a little bit later on with, certain similarities to what Maimonides, and stressing much the same as what Maimonides says. This is from Akedat Yitzchak Isaac Aramah. The essence of acknowledging divine sovereignty lies in man's gratitude to the Creator as the source of all the good and his appreciation that man himself is in no way responsible for all that the might of his own hand has accomplished. Failure to realize this implies repudiation of the yoke and fear of heaven and all the evil consequences that flow therefrom. By the way, the word fear there is the word yirah in Hebrew, which sometimes it's translated fear, sometimes reverence, awe. Okay? Yirah doesn't necessarily mean that people are quaking because they're afraid of what God is going to do. Okay? But, you don't want to forget a certain degree of awe of God. Okay? And he says, this is indeed the subject of the warnings contained in Moses' address to the people of Deuteronomy, that they would forget God's bounty and imagine that they were the authors of all the benefits they were enjoying in the promised land. They were therefore bidden to perform a rite that would act as a constant reminder that, as he quotes from the Psalm, the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. That everything was a gift bestowed by him, and he was responsible for all their prosperity, the bringing of the first fruits. Indeed, all such offerings constituted acknowledgement of divine overlordship. Okay? So that's, I think, a very eloquent expression of this idea from Akedat Yitzchak.
How does that, the title is The Binding of Isaac, right? So what
Yeah, so his name was Yitzchak, so he called his book Akedat Yitzchak.
Oh, okay. So that's not the topic of the book.
No.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. And it is a long-standing custom for authors of traditional Jewish works that they would have something with their name in it that people might remember who wrote it. Okay, so if I'm, I'm looking on the shelf at a number of books. So, you know, here is a Sidur, Tfilah LaMoshe. Now, you know, the phrase Tfilah LaMoshe comes from a psalm, right? One of the psalms we say in the preliminary prayers on Shabbat and Yontif begins with the superscript Tefillah LaMoshe Ish HaElohim, a prayer of Moses, the man of God. Nobody really believes that Moses wrote the psalm, but that's the superscript, so it's there. Here's a book, a commentary on the prayer book called Tefillah LaMoshe. And Tefillah LaMoshe was written by the 16th century mystic Moshe Cordovero. Why? Why you call it Tefillah LaMoshe? So they would remember who wrote the book, right? And similarly, not all of the time, but many authors, and in particular some Hasidic authors, would work their name into the title of the book in one way or another.
Not to be distracting here, Rabbi, but let me just tell you that you're about to lose your kippah.
I know. You know, but at least the wind won't blow it off me here.
This is a good thing.
Okay?
But the name of the book was often used instead of the name of the man. So it's nice that he's got his name in the name of the book. So that when
Right, and that was true even of authors who didn't put their name in the title. So, for instance, sitting right next to Tefillah LaMoshe, I was thinking of it, is the Shnei Luchot HaBrit, 2 tablets of the covenant, which is this big encyclopedic work written by Rabbi Isaiah Horowitz, 1625. Okay? Massive work, everything Jewish through a Kabbalistic lens, up to 1625. So after that book, ever since that time, people call him the Shelah, from the initials of Shnei Luchot HaBrit, Shin Lamed He. So everybody, you know, in the yeshiva world, everybody refers to him as the Shelah. That's who he is, by the name of his book. Okay. After that diversion, let's go back to the text and yet another explanation of the first fruits, not so different, right? But with an additional angle that really, you know, Daniel asked about a little bit before and commented on. This is from Abarbanel. The purpose of bringing the first fruits was to humble man's selfish passions, since the first fruits constitute man's most treasured possession. And he mentions 2 verses, neither of which I was especially familiar with, but they're interesting. They both talk about, you know, first fruits, so to speak, as the first one ripe in the fig tree at her first time, right? And Isaiah as an early fig before the fruit harvest. Whoever sees it devours it, right? You know, you get that first apple off the tree or the first fig off the tree, and man, you just can't wait to get your teeth into it. But here, you know, God commanded man to subdue his natural instincts and not eat therefrom, but rather dedicate them to God the Most High. Okay, comments, questions up to here? All right, hearing no questions, let's carry on. few verses later in the Torah, in the portion that, this person, the farmer, recites, he says in this prayer, the Lord freed us from Egypt by a mighty hand, by an outstretched arm and awesome power, and by signs and portents. He brought us to this place and gave us this land, a land flowing with milk and honey. Wherefore I now bring the first fruits of the soil, which you, O God, have given me. Okay? So here's the comment of Nechama Leibovitz, very well-known 20th century commentator, who says, she points out the nuances in this verse, in these last two verses, where it says, he brought us to this place, and now I bring. In exchange for one bringing, the farmer gratefully brings his first fruits. Since man cannot really reciprocate God's bounty for the simple reason that the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof, or as stated in Chronicles, for all things come of you and of your own have we given you, it is left to man to perform a symbolic act, leaving all before the Lord and make the declaration formulated in our said. Okay? So the first point she makes here is it's one bringing in return for another. In other words, what you bring when you bring the first fruits is a parallel to having been brought, or having your ancestors be brought to this place. Right? And then she says, note carefully the phrasing of the declaration, the exact nature of its content. The Israelite farmer who brings the first fruits of his soil does not say, my fathers came to the land which the Lord swore to give to them. Rather, he proclaims in every generation, as long as his people dwells in the land, whenever he brings its first fruits in thanks to the Almighty, I have entered the land. He himself, just as our Passover Haggadah states, and you all know this portion as well, in every generation, every Jew is obliged to see himself as if he had gone out of Egypt. The Holy Blessed One did not only redeem our fathers, but redeemed us too with them. So, I have entered the land. I see myself as having come in, even though it was my ancestors who got here first. Yes, Tim. Somebody was talking.
This is off topic, but I noticed that she says the Holy Blessed One rather than the Holy One, blessed be He.
Well, this is a translation from the Hebrew.
But there's no who.
It's my translation.
Oh, so is the who in there in the Hebrew? The Holy HaKadosh Baruch Hu?
She uses the traditional words HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So if you prefer, wherever you see this translation of that, just salivate and switch to the Holy One, blessed be He.
Oh, I like this one.
Okay, well, that's fine. Because who is not just a masculine word. It's also neuter.
Okay.
So, we all understand that God does not have a sex. So that's why I have taken to using this translation. Yes.
In truthfulness, I think she has two different points here in the first and second paragraph. But in the first one, I think I'm having trouble understanding it. But when I listened carefully to the text, there's a paradox. If God is really the one responsible for giving people the tools they need for the first fruit, then he is providing it to them, and for them to give it back, it is kind of weird. You're giving something back that was a gift to you to
So,
begin.
so Daniel, are you talking about the first paragraph or the
I'm
second?
talking about the first paragraph now.
Okay, so let me disabuse you of that. The point in the first paragraph is very simple, and I'm gonna show you this in the text of the verse, right?
Okay.
God brought us to this place, and then in your declaration, as a parallel to that, you say, wherefore I now bring. You know, because you brought us, and my ancestors and me, I bring this in return.
But it's that very last 3 words, or 4 or 5 words, O Lord, have given me. I'm bringing the first fruit of the soil which you, O Lord, have given me.
Yes.
That's the gift that's being given back.
Okay, but the point.
Am I totally misreading?
You're not reading the verse wrong, or her, but the main point that she's making here is that one bringing is parallel to another bringing. God brings us to the land. The farmer brings the first fruits as an acknowledgement of the good that God did for us.
Okay.
Besides, whatever we have to give is something that was a gift to us from the first place. We have nothing of our own. Everything we have is his.
Right. That's why she also quotes the verse, the earth is the Lord's. Right? One of my favorite verses. Any of you who solicit funds for various causes, just tell people, the people that you're asking, it's not really your money anyway.
And see how much you get.
Right. Although, it's interesting. I did a funeral yesterday for Charlotte Wertheimer, who was a frequent worshiper in the chapel and a long time member of Beth Yeshurun. And she solicited for every Jewish cause in town. It was Hadassah, Camp Young Judea, Houston Hillel, and 7 Acres, Jewish Federation, everything. So, she could make you feel like it wasn't your money anymore. She was just that kind of dynamic person.
Okay.
If I would, I'll tell you one quick story. I told this at the funeral. There was a time when people were upset with the government, and Jews were being asked to write a letter in protest to the president. Context not particularly important here. And there was some kind of meeting, maybe at her house, and she said, I think we all need to write letters to the president. There's 60 people sitting in the room, and everybody kind of nod their heads, that seems like a good idea. And she says, well, how many of you people are actually going to go home and write a letter to the president? You couldn't lie to Charlotte, you didn't do that. So maybe 5 hands go up around the room, right? And she brought out paper and pencils and envelopes, and she locked the door. And she said, nobody's going home until you write a letter to the president. Now, if I did that kind of thing, I would be kicked out of my own house. I would be in the doghouse, but Charlotte could do that. If you were that kind of person, you just, you believe that the earth is the Lord's, and you live like that, and you make people believe that. And you know, I may not be good at conveying it, but deep down, I really do believe that the earth is the Lord's. Yeah.
Just going to the second paragraph. Am I to understand? I find these hard to understand. The second one is making pretty much a different point. Those are two
Yes.
separate points. Okay.
Yes.
All right, that's fine. All right. Because I'm sitting here trying to
That's
make
why I
it follow.
copied both paragraphs.
Well, it says note carefully, as if it's making, well, note something that I've already said. You know,
Yeah.
this applies to.
The Israelite farmer doesn't say, my fathers came. He says, I have entered the land. Right? I have entered the land. And, you know, and everybody sees themselves as having, you know, come in, you know, through the beneficence of God. Okay. Just, you know, a little bit more, because we only have a few minutes. This piece from modern Rabbi Karolitsky, who says in that last verse that we saw, wherefore I now bring the first fruits of the soil, which you, O Lord, have given me, the Israelites are directed to make an offering of the first fruits of the harvest as an expression of thanksgiving. Then they are encouraged to celebrate the blessings they have been given, along with the blessings of Levites and the strangers in their midst. Only when they have shared these blessings with others, including the stranger, can they be satisfied, as the text suggests in the following verse, and you shall enjoy, together with the Levite and the stranger in your midst, all the bounty God has given. There can be no satiation until they have done so, meaning until they have shared. And then they can appear before God having accomplished what they were bidden to do. Okay? One more little thing here. I'll leave out the last text, but just this piece from the Jerusalem Talmud is interesting. The Mishnah tells us that the rich brought their fruits in baskets made of gold, the poor in baskets made of cane. What do you expect, right? You expect the rich are just, you know, going to be cheapskates and bring the same kind of basket as everybody else? No, they got to show off a little bit, right? So they bring fancy baskets, right? Baskets made of gold, right?
I wonder if they got their baskets back.
Well, you're about to get the answer to that. The
Oh.
Kohen was to take not only the contents, the fruits of the vine or barley or figs, but the container
Really?
basket also. For it
Oh,
says,
goodness.
the Kohen shall take the basket from your hand, literally take it from your hand. Why? Now, this is aside from, you know, the rich people, but also the poor people, right? What happens if the fruits or, you know, whatever they bring somehow become unclean and or improper for the Kohen to consume, because the Kohanim have more elaborate rules of purity, right? Well, the Kohen's got to get something out of this business. And so at least the basket remains for him.
Well, how could fruit possibly become treif?
Not treif, but if
Oh, they
it comes,
spoil.
but if it comes into contact with something that's unclean, then it's unclean too.
I thought that's what treif meant.
Well, not necessarily. I mean, it could be.
Torn.
I'm sorry.
Torn.
Yeah, could you know, come into contact with an animal that's not fit to be eaten.
Okay.
So
The word
at least
unclean is tummy.
at least the Kohen gets the basket, and the Kohen gets the fruit. Now,
So the Cohen's eating has to be better than kosher somehow?
oh, well, yeah, Truma is like that. There are all sorts of rules about Truma.
Truma meaning what the Cohen can eat.
Yes. Okay. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
We'll see you all next time.
Everyone.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Good Shabbos,
Okay.
Rabbi. Good Shabbos, everybody.
Good Shabbos.
Good Shabbos.